And welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast. I'm Jim Groom, joined by the great
Michael Branson Smith.
That's right. Here he is. And we're here to talk today for episode number 36. Count them, 36, which I think is amazing.
Jim, you sound a little under the weather, though. You all right there?
Yeah, we had to postpone our regularly scheduled podcast because I got hit with an Italian bug that put me in bed for most of Thursday and Friday into the weekend. But then my daughter had a birthday party, as I said, and kicked me out of the house. So I was ice stormed over here, kind of had to walk around and
in the dark.
But I'm back and stronger. I might sound a little worse for the wear, but that's fine because we're here to talk about actually one of my a kind of personal favorite from the 90s. And we had even questioned, is this considered a kind of independent movie or not? And that's something we could maybe talk about.
Yeah, I'm trending back towards indie.
Yeah, I think so, because it's Ang Lee's third film. Yeah. Ice Storm came out in 1997.
It does have fourth film, actually, but yeah.
It's okay. It's his fourth film, and it doesn't have like an independent cast necessarily. It has some really established stars like Sigourney Weaver, Kevin Kline. Although they weren't established at the time, like a very young Tobey Maguire. I mean, when I see Tobey Maguire for the first time on the train in this, I was like,
goofy face. Oh my God.
Gosh, he was
his
so
little
young.
Smirks,
reading the Fantastic Four. It was great.
Yeah.
And then Elijah Wood, Christina Ricci, mean, and on and on. It's quite a cast.
Yeah, and it's a really important role, I think, for Christina Ricci. I mean, in terms of this is her bridge role to getting to more adult roles, because she's been a child actress, and like she's like the little darling of the Addams Family film as Wednesday. Right. And so yeah, this is her like approaching adult themes, literally.
Yeah, and in fact, she plays that. In fact, that's a really good way to kind of transition to this movie in terms of adult themes and what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is another take, and this is, if you've been following us, and I hope you have, for the last 3 films we've been doing. Is it 3 or 4?
It's 3. This is indie film number, Kids, and Welcome
to the Dollhouse. But we did one before then.
Yeah, wait, let me look because I'm so bad. Okay, we have Kids. Oh, Welcome to the Dollhouse, and we have DD. So DD doesn't fall under that category, but it's Kids and Welcome to the Dollhouse are these kind of New York centric perspectives on the.
It's like independent New York.
Yeah,
movies. Kids kind of starting it in 95, and they're the street urchin kids of Manhattan who are dealing with the changing reality of New York City. And, we talked about Larry Clark and Harmony Korine coming in and kind of exploiting them to get that story out of them. And that was that was one of my favorite podcasts that we've done, or excuse me. And then there's going to be a lot of that this episode. I apologize in advance. And then you had Welcome to the Dollhouse, which takes us from Manhattan Center to Jersey. So we go out to dirty Jersey, and we have another vision of, New York in the 90s or late 80s, really. It's 89, but kind of getting ready for the 90s. And all these kids kind of preparing to go to Manhattan to escape their suburban life and kind of, join the big city fray and try and, identify who they are and make it. And I was really kind of fascinated by the kids you have in the kids movie, and then Welcome to the Dollhouse. Now, with Ice Storm, we go a little bit up north of New York City, and we go back 2 decades, mind you, to the 70s, 1973 to be exact. And we situate ourselves in a very upscale, wealthy Connecticut neighborhood known as New Canaan, kind of the end of the Metro North line, really rarefied wealth up there over time. And so you start to deal with a very different sense of this kind of orbiting of New York City. And New York City is still in many ways the center of this town. People work there. People's friends are there. One of the sons goes to high school there for a very special prep school. but you kind of have this whole 90s idea of the kind of tension between the suburb and the city, and what these two realities are like and how they kind of inform each other or alienate each other. And I thought it kind of worked together for our theme of the independent films, kind of a very focused 90s look at this kind of space of the city, in particular New York, and the surrounding suburbs. It's particular to me because I grew up in a suburb of New York City, Baldwin on Long Island. And so when I see for this movie to open up, Tobey Maguire sitting on the Metro North in that very particular kind of train car with those faux leather seats, I mean, that brings me back to the 80s, going back and forth to Penn Station and kind of living a life where you always identified as a New Yorker and you identified as kind of part of the New York City area. But in fact, you were kind of a lowly, Chud-born Long Islander. And those identities kind of struggle with each other. And it's kind of funny to see how the identities in this film, Ice Storm, kind of play out with this notion of culture, but there's also a notion of ennui in the suburbs. And so I don't know how you feel, Michael, but that's kind of like one of the things I thought was interesting about this film is it links us to a New York City kind of space, but then goes into a kind of deep, I would say, analysis or exploration of the culture ennui of the 70s in America. And Ang Lee that's his kind of vision here.
Yeah. And it's so great because it's this idea of the counterculture 60s has crept finally into the suburbs in the early 70s. And so all of the norm breaking of counterculture, countercultural identities, like whether it's hippies or it's, anything else that comes from the East Coast or the New York centric or the LA centric or the San Francisco centric perspective of what transgression is or how society is changing and we're not going to take it anymore. And it plays out in the suburbs, but they're awkward at it. And they're still stuck. And this is one of these things of like, it's still the beginnings of like, it made me think of the show Mad Men, but it's even more distant because you're not connected to the city so much as the characters in that show were. And you have these characters, in particular, we have the Hood family, which is Kevin Kline as Ben Hood, the dad, who's your classic man. He's wearing his London fog trench coat as he walks onto the subway platform to take the Metro North down to the city, and he looks like every other man, just like you would think from the show Mad Men. And then his wife, who's played by Joan Allen, is Elena, and she wears these very smart outfits. And then you have the promising son, as described by Tobey Maguire. He gets to go to prep school in the city. Meanwhile, his daughter is going to public school. And this is the way the family's supposed to be. And there's this really early scene where Ben calls Paul at prep school, and he basically is telling him to come home for Thanksgiving on Wednesday, not Thursday. And he describes literally how it's supposed to work. The whole point of the holidays, so you and your sister can mope around the house and your mother and I can wait on you hand and foot while the two of you are occasionally grunt for more food from behind the hair of your faces. So it's this combination of like, oh, you're scraggly kids who don't listen, but we're still going to role play this nuclear family that's perfect. And you're supposed to play in your roles. But the whole point is Ang Lee, and there's a lot of interesting production notes from the time, the interviews. So this film goes to Cannes, it goes to the New York Film Festival, which made me realize this is still very much an independent film at the time, even though it's relatively well funded as well as has superstars in it, and Kevin Kline and Sigourney Weaver. And what's interesting is a big part of the conversation is almost fetishization of malapropism central here of Ang Lee's foreignness, right? He's Taiwanese who's doing a story about America. And how could he do that? In particular, this time of awkwardness of the 70s. And he does this he does a lot. They talk about it, which is really wonderful. He talked about his research process. He talked about working with his writer, James Schamus. So the funny thing is, like, meanwhile, he's been in the United States since like the 70s himself. And he lives a very, Taiwanese lifestyle. He's got a Chinese wife, and they speak Chinese in the household and eat Chinese food. But the films he's done have always been about America in a way. I mean, his first three films are about kind of the Taiwanese experience in the United States. And then he does this film Sense and Sensibility, which is like this, Jane Austen movie that's set in England, and it's wins an Academy Award for the best screenplay. But this film, he talked a lot about how to immerse himself in the 70s and to immerse himself in this moment. He did all this crazy amount of research, and he had this researcher, Gene Castelli, who even like gave him a crash course in feminism from the time and walked him through so many of the mores, and there are shallow mores of them trying to make sense of how you're supposed to live your life back then. And he literally gave these notebooks to his actors and said, here, read these, and here's homework. Both Kevin Kline talked about it, and also Joan Allen talked about it, and how it's like he had us like do research into our families and how they met. And he made fun of Kevin Kline, who's like such a jokester. He's like this incredible, Shakespearean actor, but he's an absolute comedian at the same time. Spoke about how he still hadn't even finished his homework by the time he was at the Cannes Festival when he was being interviewed. So it's this idea of, and Lee talked about it again and again, this idea of adolescence, right? This time of, wait, the adults are supposed to be breaking the rules? Really? What does that feel like? And oh crap, we're really awkward at this.
Yeah, it's interesting with some of the research that you did. So you're Mayang Lee, if you will, and I'm Kevin Kline, still doing my research. But the two things he mentioned in that New York Times article was two basic elements he wanted to capture in this film were the idea of embarrassment and adolescence, to your point. And it's a very interesting thing, because once he encapsulates those themes for you and those concepts, like what he's doing, it really kind of comes together as a piece about not just the parents or the kids, but about the culture. And it's a really, I mean, once I saw that and I read that, things started to click. Like, obviously everything's intentional in the film, but it's very interesting for someone to give you a coda like that, and you're like, I see it. You know what I mean? It's so nice.
Yeah, and so the first family we're spending so much time with, and we're going to get to the second family, and the way they're introduced is wonderful too. The Carver family, the Hood family is supposed to be the stable nuclear family, but everybody's like trying out new things, right? And Ben visions himself as kind of the man. He's the provider, the charmer, the thinker. But he's kind of flailing around at it. Like there's these great scenes where he's like, he picks up Paul from the from the train station the day before Thanksgiving, and out of nowhere he tries to have the sex talk with his son, but it's not. And Tobey Maguire's Paul is so good, because Tobey Maguire has always had this wonderful, like, a bemused face, with these smirks that are like, are we really talking about this right now? And he brings up this idea of self-abuse. It's like, so on the self-abuse front, everybody expects you to do it in the shower, so don't do it in the shower. It's a waste of water, it's a waste of electricity. Also, avoid the linens. That's tough on your mom for cleaning and stuff. And it's just one of many examples where he wants to be this guy that's making these connections to his family. Whereas the 50s and 60s ideal of the dad would be like, do your homework, don't talk to me, I got it, my own shit. You stay over there, right? And so this is the beginning of, we're supposed to be connecting with our children. We're supposed to be making this real effort as a father to make connections with children.
And to your point, it's also very awkward, right? Yeah. Like, he's very awkward with his son, but there are moments when he finds, so there you have his son, um, Paul, but then he finds his daughter, uh, Wendy,
Wendy,
who's having
Christina Ricci. Yeah.
Christina Ricci, who's having, you know, her kind of exploration of sexuality with the neighbors, who we'll get to, um, and at the Carvers, and so he discovers them, and how he discovers them is kind of worth
We're gonna
discussing. And I
get
don't know
to,
if we're
yeah, yeah.
getting too deep, but he discovers them, and you know, after that, he kind of stern dad and everything. But after that, they have this walk home, you know, to the
Mhm.
point of him having his moments as a dad. And he's like, look, I wasn't really that concerned about what you were doing. I just don't know if he's the right kid. And trust me, you don't want to make that mistake so early. And he's like, are your feet cold? And then she gets on his back. Or he actually, no, maybe in the front.
He
He's kind of
carries her
holding
home.
her,
Yeah.
carries her.
And what's important is she allows it, right? Like, and
It's a
this is,
great moment.
and it's important because the same thing is true of the son, Paul. The conversation in the car is incredibly awkward and bad, but he allows it. He doesn't shut him down like you would imagine a modern teenager might. Like, Dad, stop! I'm going to throw myself out of this car, which is something like, and literally happens in Lady Bird, 20 years later in a different movie. She literally throws herself out of the car when her mom tries to like have a talk with her. And but at this time and in this moment, they're still forgiving of him in his awkwardness, which is kind of which makes the Hood family, you're like kind of like, okay, I think there's going to be, even though there's these transgressions, and I think we should get into the Elena, the wife character and her navigating transgression before we dive even more deeply into Ben's transgressions. As a way of like transitioning into the Carver family is through the wives of the two families. Like, so they're forgiving, but Elena is this wife who's supposed to be this portrait of like, I come from wealth, so I have these very smart, but they're still very conservative outfits. Like they're like sweater, there's all this like, it's almost like she's wearing an Afghan all the time, but it's a really expensive Afghan
and
that's
it's like
made in
blue
Paris.
gossamer
Yeah.
underneath, above another blue, and it's a really awesome outfit. But you're right, it's totally conservative.
Yeah, and so she doesn't show any sexual confidence or anything like that, and so there's this early scene where, and she's at the library's having like a book sale, like, as libraries are wont to do, they're overflowing with books, and she's at the psychology section, and it's so of the times there's all these self-help books, and there's a lot of, kind of responses to Valley of the Dolls type of,
there was some Albert Camus, which I liked.
Yeah. And she gets approached by what I described again and again as the hippie in the notes, as the hippie minister, right?
Yeah.
So there's this kind of the hippie reverend, right? It's this new wave approach to being part of a church community. And he's like saying like, hey, Lena, I saw you once at the church, and I know it's not for everyone, but, really would love to see you come back. And you're like, okay, that's kind of typical. But then he like goes at her, well, I see you kind of try to find answers through books the way that I find them through people. In people, and she just snaps at him immediately. It's like, whoa, that's a veiled insult, right? And then we realize, well, wait, he's kind of hitting on her.
Yeah.
And then there's
provocative, as he says.
Exactly. And it doesn't work. But what she's really interested is she sees her daughter, Wendy, ride by. And Wendy is this like provocative, beautiful character because she wears this massive Red Riding Hood cloak throughout the entire film again and again, and it makes her just stand out. And she's this confident portrait of a young woman who's seeking out her ideas of sexuality and exploring them with the two neighbor boys, and she just sees that and she's like, I want that again. I want that freedom again. And it leads to, but one of my favorite scenes. So you go ahead.
One more point before we go over there, because I love that. But one of the things, as she's saying that, like, she says, it looks like freedom. And then she says, to the Reverend, when's the last time you've ridden a bike?
Yeah.
And he says, and he always has these kind of like remarks that are like kind of come-ons. It's like, well, I
Yeah.
don't know. I guess it's just like riding a bike, right? You just get right back on it. And as if this sexual, because he had
Yeah,
just
you're
said, I do
right. Oh
one-on-one
god, I
therapy, but
forgot
like
that. Yeah.
he's coming on, and there's that kind of like, you see it all over. I mean, it's part of the tension all over this film
Yeah.
is this kind of awkward, as if the adults are as awkward as the kids in
Yep.
terms of trying to explore that sexuality that they don't exactly know what to do with.
Yeah. It's like this is the old rules are there, but the new ones are rubbing against it, right? Where it's like they're supposed to be, he's a minister who's supposed to be exploring connections to his flock by experiencing what they speak, where the old version is like, the very Catholic, I'm the priest, I literally don't have sex, right? and
Yeah.
and at the same time, I'm supposed to tell you how to live your life, even though I have no idea what that life is like. Right. And so that's the old version. And it's like, no, that's not going to work for everyone. And so, yeah, you're right. They're just constantly butting up against one another.
Yeah.
And so
And
you go ahead.
that was
Go.
my deep thought, Michael.
Deep
That's all.
Thoughts by Jim Groom.
Thank you.
And so Elena is our wife who's seeking her own. She has this dissatisfaction with her husband, which is very, very clear. He at one point is, tries to make advances at bed, and she is just not interested at all.
Not having it.
And he's just like, okay, whatever, good night. And and then at the same time, she goes on a bike ride. And so there's this earlier scene where Christina Ricci's character, Wendy, she's in that same earlier when she had biked by the library, she had gone into the drugstore and she had stolen a devil dog. And she gets busted by this lady who's older, but she's a customer, and she ignores him. They kind of give each other the long stare, and it's like, we're from different generations. I don't understand you. You don't understand me. And so they disconnect and they walk away. And interestingly enough, Elena, she pulls out her bike, she goes for a ride, and she goes to the same drugstore, and you think, oh, she's just going to, toy around. And then she starts shoplifting all this makeup.
Exactly.
And you're just like, what the fuck? And that's her like, I'm going to be transgressive. Meanwhile, it's not like this is audience known. This isn't like Elena got found out about her daughter through this old lady caller. It's like, Mrs. Hood, your daughter, I saw her. That didn't happen. We don't know. That's not part of the story. And she gets busted by the owner,
Pharmacist.
the pharmacist. Yeah. But you get a sense like that they don't call the police. They're like, oh yeah, no, you just forgot to pay. They allow her to get through it. That's this like society of the past where it's like, oh, she's a good person, let's let her get away with this. But at the same time, it's charging to her. And when she goes home, she suddenly wants now to have a moment with her husband. And the best part about it is that he starts to talk about it, and she's like, no talking. You're
gonna ruin it. I love that too.
It's so good.
It's hysterical.
Yeah. And so this is again and again like the beginning of like Elena's trying to role play the liberated woman. I can be free of responsibility. I don't care about the moral consequence. But there's another woman who's the real, the archetype of the supposed archetype of the 70s woman who is liberated.
Yeah. And I think there's a scene where the Hoods go over to the Carvers. So Carvers are this kind of alternative family that play. It's these two families. And so the Hoods are friends with them, and they're neighbors, but friends. And so the Carvers are having a party. They're having a dinner party, and the Hoods come. And it becomes apparent at this dinner party that something may be going on between Sigourney Weaver's character, which is
Janie
Carver.
Set the scene. Who are all the Carvers?
So the Carvers are Jim Carver, who's the father. And you learn a lot about him and his kind of creations. I guess he's some sort of an engineer. Janie Carver, played by Sigourney Weaver, is the mom. Elijah Wood plays Mikey, the older brother, and Adam Hahn
Bird.
Bird is Sandy Carver, and he's the
Yeah.
younger brother who reminds me of you from all the stories you've told me about your GI Joes
Yeah,
and blowing shit up. So
totally.
he's kind of the younger
I
brother.
was equally awkward and equally had a failed early experience with a girl who tried to play the
You
I'll
show
show
me
you
yours,
your,
I'll show me yours.
and I was just like, what the fuck? Couldn't take
That
it.
shit happened. Remember,
Yeah.
I talked last episode about the dollhouse in my backyard?
Yeah.
That's where all that shit went down. Like, you
Yeah.
show me mine, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. Like,
Yeah.
that was like a neighborhood. Like, you would go to the dollhouse to do that stuff. So, and that was fun, actually. I didn't mind that. But like, that was good.
And
That
so
was
we have these parallel nuclear families of 4, but the Carvers are very different. So continue their dinner.
Yeah, so they're at this dinner, and the house is very different. It's unlike the Hood's house, which is very warm and
Yeah.
seems to kind of throw back to the 50s or even the 30s.
Yeah,
This house is very modern.
The lime kitchen is so awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. And this one is super modern, all glass. And
Yeah.
there was actually in that neighborhood, New Canaan, there were a bunch of, they were called the Harvard Five, which were a bunch of architects who came down to New Canaan and build these modernist houses. And they're still there, and they're really kind of, you know, they're considered masterpieces of the era. And so this is probably one of those houses. It's all glass. It's beautiful. And they're having this dinner party, and it's very kind of, you can see they're wealthy and they're cultured and they're talking at the table. And you brought it up in the notes. And one of the great point is there's another couple, and I don't know the couple's name. Do you remember?
I don't either. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
They show up again at another party, but they talk about the husband having brought the wife to see Deep Throat
in the city.
And I was thinking about this, Michael, and I don't know if it was Deep Throat or Behind the Green Door.
Yeah.
But one of those two films was like the second highest grossing film of 1972 or 73.
I think it's Deep Throat, because Deep Throat, it's those calculations that include all of like the mafia money that went into, you know, that they pilfered from this production back in the 70s, because the porn industry was kind of controlled in New York by the mafia, and a lot of that money was filtered out, and it was watched so much, but the numbers are so weird. But it was actually in theaters. That's what's so crazy.
Yeah, it was in theaters, and I'm assuming that it wasn't a crazy idea. Now, this might be wrong, for people to go and see it together.
Well, I mean, it was for the suburban household, because the great thing is, like, it's still like, this is the awkward version of it. It's like, oh my God. And there were all these gross men around us that were doing their thing, and it was like disgusting. And so, and then she, in Janie's character, and she said, but it was so ironic. And Janie's like, wait, what was ironic? You know? And it's like, well, the man's name was Rod, and she just tries to cover. And it's like, they're trying to role play this idea of like, oh, we do transgressive things too. You know, we're super modern and hip. We went to see Deep Throat, you know, and in the meanwhile, it's also interesting because both Mikey and Sandy are the little servants, right? They're like the 50s style servants. They're doing the drinks at the table for all the adults, and Mikey fucks it up badly and spills wine.
Terrible at it, exactly.
and then they're also spying on the adult conversation through the moon, you know, the moon window in the ceiling, and yeah, that space is so weird. And they talked, the cinematographer talked about, like, they did all this stuff with reflections and glass, and everybody is through something, transmission or a reflection of who there's, it's all this arty talk, but it's still great because it's such a contrast in family, right? And we have Elena, who's clearly smart and confident, at least presenting herself as stuff. Not Elena, sorry, Janie, the Sigourney Weaver character, in contrast to Elena, who's not confident. And and you go ahead, but I have one more. Let me say one more, because I love how
go.
After the dinner, Elena does the classic thing, like, oh, I'll go help with the dishes. And Janie is in her super smart, cool, like dress that's purple and black, and she's got the ringed bangles on her for a belt, but
Yeah.
then she's got the
What an outfit.
crazy yellow gloves to do the dishes. And Elena tries to help, and she just basically tells her to fuck off, like, I'm not going to play this role of like, let's chit chat as like sympathetic moms with our plight of having to do dishes. Like, I'm just going to do this shit by myself and you go away.
Yeah. I don't need your help.
Right.
And it's interesting because the reason why I kind of wanted to focus a little bit on Deep Throat when you brought it on is it actually.
Wait, Jim, you want to focus on Deep Throat?
I don't want to focus. I'm interested in it in that, like, one of the things that I think Ang Lee was talking about was this idea of not just the adolescents, the kids or the adults, but the culture of adolescence.
Right.
And the sexual revolution,
sure.
1972, 1973. This is happening, right? And this comes when they start referencing the key party, as you said. And there's this kind of discomfort with this kind of, openness to sexuality. And I'll go as an upper middle class couple and we'll go together and see Deep Throat, which I guess was a thing for a brief moment with pornography. Like, you had those people who were jerking off, those weird guys, but then you had these couples who were wealthy who said, like, this is the new thing. Like, this is a golden age of a new awakening of sexuality. That quickly passed. But there's that transitional moment, and this film is totally trying to capture that awkwardness, just like the awkwardness of the young girl Wendy saying to Sandy, "You show me yours, and I'll show you mine." And there's a moment, like, you don't stay in that moment for long. Like, you go on the teenagers, and then there's a far more ritualized idea of trying to kind of, I don't know, play around, fool around, as they called it. It wasn't like, hey, if I show you mine, will you show me yours? Like, it changes. It gets more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And
it comes with a certain amount of eventual confidence in the ideas of it, and whether it's real or
convention.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of convention to it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and sexuality as this idea, like, after the 60s, like, it was going to be a new thing. And that opportunity opened and closed really quickly. And Ang Lee really nails it by having them talk about going to see Deep Throat at the table and then talk about a key party to really place you in a moment where, these adults are, on the verge of almost like, in a different context, dropping acid, right? But they're just doing it with, sex. And this is this new experiment that they're all sitting around kind of wondering about.
Well, they're all smoking pot too after dinner. So the party continues after dinner and they're smoking pot. And so there are all these experiments. And so you're right. And that's what's so great about this. But the film is also about these tugs back to normalcy overall. And that's the idea of, Janie is, as described, just not interested in the women's work, but she's up for some extracurricular activities with Ben, which is finally revealing. So the reveal is really funny because as we're talking about the sex, it's all in this movie bad, right? It's not romantic. It's not visualized as pleasurable at all. It's just an act that you do as part of this transgressive activity, which is in this moment. So Ben is revealed with it being on top of Janie for a brief moment. And she goes, and he gets off. And the best part about it is that he instantly falls into the habit of being a man who's supposed to just be the center of attention, talking about his day, how work sucks and how golf sucks. And she's just like, dude, I've already got a husband.
Yeah.
You're boring. Stop.
Yeah.
And he's like, you're right. Sorry. Note taken, But at the same time, she's this person who's like trying to say, it is just sex. We're not in a relationship here. I'm going to hold you at bay. And she holds this facade quite well for a long period of time.
Yeah. I mean, for much of the film. And in fact, unlike Eleanor, Elena, Janie is really kind of like the woman who is somewhat in charge of her sexuality and
Correct.
is in charge of who she is in her body. But there's a cost to that too, seemingly in this film.
Yeah.
Despite that, right? I mean, her outfits are great. Sigourney Weaver is great. She's
Oh,
completely
so
convincing. She
she's so
goes right
great.
into the character. But like at the same time, she's still stuck in the 70s where there's expectations of motherhood, of being there. And that's one of the places where she's
Yeah.
completely inept,
Yeah, and
right?
like
Or at
there's
least checked out. Maybe not
right. I
inept.
mean,
She might be
the inept
good.
moment is when she's like getting the frozen turkey out of the refrigerator, and it just goes flying right on the floor, and it's like a massive stone that you expect to just like go right into the basement, through the kitchen floor
Or
because it's so heavy. But
or
she
when her
does.
son is having is putting M80s or some sort of rockets on top of these kind of paper airplanes, where he puts his old, the old model airplanes, and he puts his these fireworks on and then throws them into the woods and they explode and they're making these huge sounds as she drives up. And
Yeah.
she comes in and she's like, "What the hell are you doing?" Freaks out, but then she says, "Play with this." And she gives him a whip.
Yeah, and but the whip was out there because it was his present from another family who was trying to be cool, and transgressive in their own way.
And so he's whipping the roses off of a
Yeah,
bush. I
yeah,
mean, it's just a great moment of just
yeah.
like, what am I doing in this role?
Yeah, and that's the like disconnection to the kids that these parents have that we've talked about previously, of 70s parents who are out trying to like, oh, we left our parents live these closeted, very controlled lives. We're not going to do that. We're going to explore it. And that's where the whole idea of the quote unquote me generation, which continues to this day and is brutal, is what it's named after, where it comes from, is this idea of, no, we're not going to live that life of role playing norms and being what we're supposed to be. And one of my favorite things is like, sorry. So even though Janie's having this affair with Ben, and there's going to be another, they're going to have sex again, Ben starts talking about his wife, and Janie's like, "Nah," and she literally walks out the door, and and Ben's like in his boxers, and it's this probably one of my favorite scenes where Ben is just suddenly left alone in his boxers, and he's just, I wonder if she's going to come back, and so he hangs out in bed for a while, and he drinks and smokes, and then he starts to explore, and he swings like the husband Jim's golf clubs in the living room, and then starts looking through the medicine cabinet, and eventually he gives up because Jane's like, nah.
So I wonder, I mean, do you think in terms of the 70s, right? When I talk about the 70s to my kids, right? So I was born in 71. I was, 8 or 9 as the 70s were ending, even into the 80s. One of the things that my kids are always struck by are the stories, right? That there was a certain amount of lack of oversight of everything. Like no one was watching the farm. And I wonder, when I see this film, like, is part of that this? Like, is part of this kind of moment of the adolescent, at least period, our parents were going through? Or our parents that transitioned from, having kids in the 60s into the 70s and understanding the way in which the world was changing and trying to adopt. And as a result, like there was very little time for this idea of child rearing, or at least for the traditional notions of it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I'll give my perspective. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
we like to pepper our stories. It's like, so, I'm a child of divorce. And my father was very absent. So he was not like part of my brother and I's lives for the vast majority of our youth. Didn't come to visit anything. And so, but my mother, she's still a young woman. And so dating was a big part of her experience, and being home, being a kid who had a mother who went through boyfriends, right? And had relationships, and you do the classic, like you make connections to the male figure at times. And I saw my first James Bond movie with one of those boyfriends, like, it wasn't Dr. No, it was Moonraker, right? And so, oh, that's how you get to be a boy and be a man. And that was cool. And so I'd never seen that kind of a film, a spy movie I'd never seen before, and so it's like, that's cool. Wow. Tell me more, introduce me to more. But at the same time, my mom was just gone because she has to go on dates, or she's playing tennis, or she's going to conferences. And what happens as a result is like, I'm alone. I'm going to have a party, or I'm alone. I'm just going to like not get into trouble, but just like be out there in the world and be expected to figure your own thing on your own.
So my take on that is absolutely. My dad completely out of the picture, like at the bar, not that far from our house, but nowhere near our house. My mom dealing with all sorts of, craziness between 7 kids and trying to manage that, but then also having her own mental stability. So in and out of mental institutions. And so you have 7 kids completely feral in a house, and like anything goes. And literally anything did go. And like, the kind of early relationships to alcohol, to sex, to all these things. When I think like when my kids at their age, I'm like, Jesus, I was already blacking out, or I was already in a situation where, sexually was far ahead. Thank God. I mean, thank God they're not in that situation. But I'm like, was that a result of this kind of like complete adolescence that our own parents were going through? Like, I always thought it was an issue with us, the kids, but actually maybe it was an issue with our parents.
Yeah. And I think like, I think it's kind of fun to talk about the siblings as a pair, so Paul and Wendy, the Hoods children, they clearly have like a connection still, and so they call each other Charles, which seems to be some sort of inside joke that's never explained, but maybe it came from pop culture and it's a forever meme somehow. They literally call each other Charles constantly. And Paul plays the annoyed brother, like, are you messing with my stuff while I'm at prep school? But at the same time, he doesn't really care. And she's playing his records and she's like, that's my record, but he's not really mad. And they actually talk about their parents. Like they bring up divorce, like how are the parental units doing in Tobey Maguire's like smirky, awkward way, which is so perfect. Like he does that stuff so well. And so they're engaged, but at the same time, they're super independent because there's a whole other plot based on Paul trying to explore being in wealthy world of Manhattan. And he's interested in this beautiful girl, Libbets, who's played by Katie Holmes, and like prime Katie Holmes time, like Dawson's Creek Katie Holmes. And that's like a side plot that doesn't even happen. And at the same time, we have, Wendy, who's exploring her sexuality with the 2 brothers, Mikey and Sandy. But they seem to be honest with one another. And you get a sense that their household is containing them, even though their parents are, goofy and their kind of awkwardness. Especially you get a sense that Elaine is still like very much the traditional mother. Whereas Mikey and Sandy, I described them in the notes as like, they're like the bubble children. And this reminds me much of my brother and I. We had our own worlds. Like we were not connected at all. We had such different interests. I loved watching movies on Saturday mornings, karate movies, 70s, like new Hollywood movies. My brother wanted to play sports. And I was like, sports are stupid, even though we both ended up swimmers, but he liked football and baseball and being out there he was much more social. But at the same time, these 2 characters, they're their own versions of completely individualistic without any kind of parental guidance. And the way they engage Christina Ricci, who has her character Wendy, who has some confidence about like her burgeoning sexuality, these 2 just don't know what the fuck to do. No. Because they're just like, they've never seen, you get a sense like they've never seen normal relationship between their parents, because we learn, Jim, we haven't talked about Jim much because he's like a ghost in the film. And there's this great moment where Jim comes home from his trip to Houston. He's like, I'm back. And Mikey's character says, you were gone? Like they don't even know he exists. And so this absenteeism is so interesting to me. And those 2 characters are just, totally like Mikey's into molecules, and he's the one who goes running out into the ice storm towards the end of the film. And Sandy's stuck in his preteen limbo. He's still connected to his GI Joes and his toys, but at the same time he's staring down Wendy's backside during band practice and being like, whoa.
And when we're confronted with if you show me mine, I'll show you yours, he doesn't know what to do. Like you said, that bubble blows up and he freaks out, and his mom comes in, and this is when that's one of the great moments is the mom comes in and says, your body is your temple. This is why young kids in Samoa are sent out into the woods so they can figure this stuff out. I was like, what kind of, that just didn't make sense, but it was wonderful. Like
it was telling so much about two characters at the same time. It's like Janie's like, I have some culture. Like I did go to college at least for a few years before I got pregnant, you know, and married this guy, Jim, who's super smart, but disconnected. Yeah, but at the same time, it's talking about like, my kids are really fucked up. Treat them a little more gently. You know?
Take it easy on them.
And she knows there's this great scene where Jim, after having basically been ignored by the two boys, he goes into the bedroom where Janie is on the bed reading a book, and he sits down on the bed, but we don't know it. It's the best. It's like, it's a physical comedy joke. It's a waterbed, and he basically practically launches her out of the bed, you know, because it's like, and he's like, Jesus Christ, we got to get a normal bed. I can't handle this fucking thing. This is too modern for me. Again, the awkwardness, right, of this moment.
Yeah. And he's completely awkward around his own wife, right? Like he's awkward almost in every context, except if he's thinking about new semiconductors with silicon. So it suggests that he's on the edge of the Silicon Valley craze. And he created the peanut styrofoams styrofoam peanuts.
You know for sure, like Jim's going to be a billionaire within 20 years. You know, there's no way he's not, you know?
Yeah. But at the same time, you know, anyway, but there is that kind of, and that family's interesting to me, not only because of the house, but like that cruel modernism of that house is also the cruel modernism of that family unit. You know, like it's all so like angular, right? And there's no smooth pieces. There's no warmness to it.
No, there's no plants. There's no, and the cinematographer talked about how they specifically, you know, shot that house in the early because they were bridging into the spring, so it's set at Thanksgiving, but it's technically the end of winter when they're shooting and spring is approaching, and they shot that house first because there'd be no leaves yet. And so by the time they were shooting the Hood house, you know, so when we see the through like the Thanksgiving dinner, and you can see outside, and it's actually there's some grass, and I mean it's obviously incongruent, but it doesn't matter. But it's this way of creating this warmer space, and it's a dead space. They're both in the middle of the woods, which is also interesting too, in a funny way to think about it as a metaphor. Is like these two families are stuck in the middle of the woods, and they're like being forced to like congregate with one another and navigate these changes in society together. And their kids are like, well, you're the only two boys, so I guess I have to try to hook up with you.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And just the fact of that proximity is what determines in some ways your relationship. And the idea that she offers him a devil dog when her and Mikey, so when Christina Ricci's character, Wendy, and Mikey meet in a pool somewhere with all the leaves there, which is such a great scene. You know, before, you know, they fool around, if you will, she offers him a devil dog that she had stolen, like, as like, you want a devil dog? Okay, no, because I'm chewing a gum, which he takes out and he puts behind his ear. But I really did love the feeling that this movie, I mean, there's a lot of different elements of this movie that I like, but one of the ones I liked most is that sense that the camera gives you of that feeling of that kind of, Antonella refers to it as somewhat depressing and somber, but I do love the way in which they're walking through those woods, and like you can kind of feel that cold, you know, maybe not full New England, but New York, Connecticut, like winter coming in. And then for me, it hits me on like a visceral level because, and probably you having grown up in Connecticut, because like that's spaces that I know, that's spaces that I lived in. and maybe not that house or in that neighborhood, but that
Yeah.
sensibility as a child. It was a
Mhm.
really transporting film at certain points when they would walk between the houses and around the houses in those woods. I just really love those shots.
Yeah, the woods were definitely part of my, I mean, it's much more suburban. I was middle of Connecticut, suburb of Hartford, where New Canaan is typically more thought of as like even though it's Connecticut, it's a suburb of New York City. So
Sure.
the disparity in wealth is tremendous. Like it's the finance capital of the world in New York, among many, many, many other things, where Hartford is like the insurance capital of the world. We had one professional sports team for a hot minute called the Hartford Whalers, and the
No.
indoor league Hartford Hellions, which was fucking awesome for that brief moment when there was indoor soccer was a thing. Where New York has everything, like the Giants and the Jets and the Yankees and the Dodgers. I mean, the Mets, but whatever. But the idea is like, yeah, there were still the woods, and the woods are something that are still part of the suburbs in these areas. And being part of the woods in your neighborhood was something I experienced deeply. Of course, I've described that before. But yeah, and so what's great is how this film culminates these transgressions and this awkwardness with, we're going to do the performance of the most like sexually liberated thing we can do as adults, and we're going to host a key party, and the key party is hosted by Dot Halford, played by the awesome Allison Janney, who's just like so effing funny, and she's she did The West Wing forever and so many great roles. And even though she's like the scenes, she's like I did 2 minutes, but I'm like kind of own it for the 2 minutes that I have. Is she's like, you want to throw your keys in the bowl, everybody? And this is the beginning.
It's purely optional.
It's pure. And this is the moment where, Ben basically confronts his wife with his like infidelity. Like she's been clued into it a little bit. Like she asks, like, is that a new cologne? Like meaning like,
Yeah.
I smell something off on you, my friend, and
when he gets the daughter, he finds the daughter fooling around with Mikey. It's basically, he's like, yeah, I was in their basement. I was in their house because I was returning a coffee cup. And she's like,
cup.
oh, the mustache cup?
A cup,
Come
Jim.
on.
Come on, Jim. A cup?
Exactly.
That's what you were doing, Jim? You were returning a cup.
I agree with her. That was a bad lie. But that's the other thing. He was so stupid. Like he wasn't very good at hiding anything. Not that
and that's the whole point, is they're all so bad at everything. It's bad sex. And so let's do the worst performance we possibly can, which is do the most liberal idea. It came from California, right? They literally talk about it. This is a California thing. Woo, we're going to do a key party. And for those that don't know what a key party is, just in case you don't, it's where all the couples show up and they throw the keys, which are the men's keys, because it's their car, in a bowl. And at the end of the evening, women are going to just randomly fish out a pair of keys, and that woman is going to go home with that man to play Monopoly, and that's about all they'll do.
To fool around.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's this great setup to this where Ben and Elena have actually had a fight, and this is one of the other scenes that's really great because it's the day after Thanksgiving. It's eating the leftovers. And so it's the carcass of the family moment. So the family Thanksgiving had been so wonderful. And Ben is like, isn't it so great we're all here? Even though Wendy does this great Thanksgiving prayer where she talks about, thank you for killing all the Indians and allowing us all these excesses. And finally, Ben's like, would you stop? Even though you're ruining it. This is a perfect family moment, the four of us. And so at the same time, the contrast is the next evening. It's the leftovers. It's the carcass of the meal. And it's a carcass of the family because Elena's kind of coming to her steam. She knows he's cheating and she can't quite say it yet. Like, I know you're cheating. But so there's this tension and the fight. And the great thing is we also get Wendy's perspective. She's watching TV, and we get the classic experience of the child dealing with their parents fighting. And it's a common thing, but it's done so delicately where she's totally ignoring it as a kid normally would. It's not violent, it's not that loud, but they're not hiding it at the same time. And so this is the precursor to going to the key party. She's already alarmed by her sense of her husband. And so she's like, you know what? Because they go inside, and, magnanimous Dot's like, it's a key party, everybody. And Ben's like, wait, what? I didn't know. And of course, he probably knew. And so they go back to the car to talk about it. What are we going to do? And he's like, well, we could go home. Let's just go home. And she's like, she calls him out, and he admits to the affair in the most oblique way by basically saying, what does he say? He says something like, I didn't enjoy it. And she's
it's
just
not
like,
what you think, as he keeps on saying. I didn't enjoy it, and it's not what you think.
Oh no, I don't feel good about it.
Yeah.
And then he tries to put it on her. It's like, you're just getting wound up. And then she goes, basically, fuck you, grabs the keys out of the ignition and walks right back into the house and tosses the keys right to Dot. And she tosses them right into the bowl.
Yeah. And so at that point, there's a couple of things that happen in the party. There's some good encounters. There's the encounter between Elena and the hippie reverend.
Oh yeah,
that's a good one. He reappears, and he again tries to hit on her, and she again is like, he basically, what does he say? He's like, I'm coming here to try and keep my flock in order, or
sometimes you have to be with your flock to understand them. And her response is, I'm going to try not understand the implications of that. She cuts him so deeply
for the second time.
And he can't take it. He immediately leaves. And as he's leaving, he pulls his keys out of the
keys. So it was clear that he was there for a good time.
He was.
And then the second encounter is between Ben and Janie. And Janie and Ben, obviously, he hasn't seen Janie since she got up and left when he was basically starting to talk about his wife. Like, I think my wife knows, da-da-da. She's like, I'm having none of this. I'm going to go put birth control in. And then she gets in the car and she takes off. And that's when the scene you talked about, he's kind of walking around the house, kind of looking at things, playing at fake golf or whatever. So he hasn't seen her since. And he's like, what the hell? What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And she's basically like, just because we slept together 2 times doesn't mean I owe you anything. And she is like cold and trying to just basically block him out and looking out the window while he's kind of appealing to her. And you can see he's attached. He sees that as his way out of his family, even if it isn't. And she's kind of, in that regards, a little bit more kind of keyed in than him to saying no, it's no solution to anything what we're doing.
Right.
Go away. You know what I mean? I'm doing it for completely different reasons than you are. This is not a good match. And I think there's a moment there where I think you start to see a break in the armor a little bit for Janie.
Yeah. She doesn't want to have a connection, but he's trying to connect with her, and she has to force herself to not look at him, to not connect with him. Right. It's where she's always confidently looking at people that she wants to confront in the face. And at a certain point, as he's like, but what does this mean? What does this mean? She just has to turn away and say dude, just fucking go away. And she tries to cut him down. It's like, how you take it isn't all that interesting to me, Benjamin, is the direct quote. And so, she's starting to crack here as well. And Ben just gets drunker and more drunk. And he's just totally out of it. And then the performance of the keys happens, right? It's the end of the night, and Dot is super excited. How do we do this, everybody? And the men and women are sitting on opposite sides of the setting of the living room, against the hearth, which is in the center with the fireplace, which is so funny if you think about it. And one woman bravely enough says, I'll go first, and she grabs the keys, and it's some random guy, it doesn't matter, and they leave. and then it's Janie's turn. And meanwhile, there's a woman who's brought her son.
That's a whole nother family pictures episode, is bringing your son to a key party.
Yeah, who's in his 20s, clearly.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's Janie who confidently pulls out his keys, which has like a 6-inch, 7-inch long leather strap attached to it. She's like, I know who's the dick who's got this kind of a ornament on his keychain. And so she's out of there, but it's not without Ben trying to interrupt, which is really awkward because he's so drunk he falls on the ground and he's taken to the bathroom. So he's out for the count now. He's out of the key party running. He's not even available. He's off the board. No drafting Ben anymore.
No, Ben's gone. And then it leaves Elena and Jim.
Yeah.
And they're both not in it for this. They both see what happening with their spouses, and they're kind of like, Jim's really awkward. He's like, I thought it was gonna be different than it is.
Yeah.
And
it's for someone who
I like him as a character.
Yeah, and you're right. And I'm really recognizing this in this moment too, because he's the one who sums it up perfectly in this moment. Like, and he does again later in the car too, which is so sad, but true.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, I was hoping this was going to be more fun, basically. Like, he's like, the idea titillated him. You get a sense like, it's like, wow, we can go have sex with someone else's wife. Isn't that cool?
Yeah. Some meaning behind the transgression, right?
Yeah.
And there was none.
No. And there's nothing to it. But at the same time, Elena is still so jacked up. She says, I'm here. You're here. There's 2 sets of keys left. My husband's, who's drunk and, throwing up in the bathroom, and yours. And she grabs Jim's. And so they walk out and they're like, let's go together. And he's like, okay. And they get in a car. And so the goal is they're going to go somewhere, but then it leads to an encounter really quickly. And it's over like that. And it's, again, really bad sex. And it's literally, it's so great because Jim is like, God, that was awful.
Yeah, that's not the line you want to hear from either party, right?
And he says this out loud. It's like, that's the great thing about Jim in these 2 moments. He's like the one person who's saying what he actually thinks, again and again. And he's like, I'm so sorry. And Elena immediately retreats and she's like, let me just get my things. And she goes and she immediately retreats to her husband. And that's what's so interesting to me ultimately, is like, you think she just wants to like clean herself up and leave and just be done, or just go in the house and just like not go back. But she checks on her husband. And so it's this classic, it's this exploration retreat.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because while that scene is happening, it's interspersed with cuts of, the Tobey Maguire character. Paul, who's actually in New York City trying to make a move on that rich woman Libet, or rich girl Libet's, but his roommate moved in on him, who's far more confident and far more experienced. And so he tries to roofie his roommate, but in fact ends up roofing them both and kind of knocking them out. So like his whole plan is thwarted, and she's basically saying, you remind me of my brother, and he jokes, maybe, do you want to take a bath with me? But she's out of it. She's kind of knocked out. And so his is kind of like an aborted enterprise like theirs, and so he has to go back. But then you cut to the other house, the Carver house, and you have Christina Ricci, Wendy, and Sandy are kind of not hooking up, but are doing that young exploration. They have to kind of, at least Sandy does, he takes a couple of shots of vodka ahead of time, so he's a little bit more emboldened. And that's a great scene because they're sitting there and like they talk about, she's like all experienced, like, have some vodka, drink this. And he does. And she's like, are you drunk? And he's like, I don't know. What does it feel like to be drunk? Like that whole idea, like there is no experience, like it's all new. And
I
she's
don't
like,
think I'm
I don't know
spinning.
either.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And it comes clear
And
she
then
doesn't know either.
they just fall asleep, you know?
Exactly. And they were just kind of like naked next to each other, falling asleep. And he was telling her, I love you. And that's when she asked him if she was drunk, if he was drunk. And he couldn't answer that. And that was a
Yeah,
real moment of that adolescence. And
yeah,
it was a real kind of sense of this sense of like you're talking about, this lack of experience and this lack of kind of, I don't know, um, really understanding what it was they were trying to wrap their head around. And then you cut to finally Mikey. And Mikey is out in the ice storm, which is the name of the movie. And he's walking around New Canaan because he feels like this is when things are most pure, because he talks about the molecules and he
yeah.
talks about how everything is still all the molecules. So they can't kind of, he
Move.
talks about this great thing in school where he talks about the idea of molecules are like food, right? So, like you would eat and taste food, when a molecule of something that smells terrible, for example, goes into your nose, it's like you're eating whatever you're smelling.
Like
And
poop.
so it's a great like,
Because
analysis to
it's
really
true.
freak you out. So
As a
like when
former
you go
almost chemist.
so when you go into the bathroom, be careful of what you smell because it's kind of like eating it. And so that was a great moment. But then he goes deeper into that whole idea of the molecules and when things are frozen, the molecules are at their most clean, he was suggesting. And he was exploring, but it was almost like a death wish. He was like sliding on the
Yeah.
diving board above the pool that was empty, and it's this really harrowing scene. But he's almost exploring this whole universe as if, he's an astronaut, right?
Yeah,
Like it's
he's
some other
he's
space.
he's totally untethered to like, this idea of being in a bubble is kind of expansive, like in this situation. Like he's expanded his bubble to the entire outside world of the ice storm, and it's only for him. And he's exploring, he literally bounds through a field, and it's this, it's okay. So this is another story. So this is something that in a weird way I connected to. So being alone and studying, like I was a total nerd, like just studying late into the night for this crazy AP US history who made us memorize extensive notes, and we would aggressively try to remember all this stuff. And I remember just doing this into the night, and my mom's far asleep, and I would occasionally go get my bike. And this was the first time I ever drank coffee too. So I'd be really awake. And I'd be like, I have all this energy. I'm going to do something. And I would get on my bike in the middle of the night, and I would go on like a 5-mile bike ride down these like roads in the middle of the night at like 1 a.m, which is really fucking stupid. Like if a car happened to come by, I'd totally just get jacked. And that's this weird connection. Like that's where this character kind of is, and
Totally.
it culminates in this moment of, he recognizes it of bad luck. Oh shit. And he gets electrocuted. And that's like the he's sitting on the classic guardrail of a road
Yeah.
that's metallic, and he's staring at a fallen electric line that's in the middle of the road, and it sparks, like the transformer explodes, and the line starts waving, and he goes, oh shit, right as it hits the 10 yards away, and he gets electrocuted, and it's really gruesome moment where he just like, he flumps over onto the frozen asphalt and just slides forward on it.
You said, and you said this before we went on and did this podcast. It's gruesome, right? The whole idea
Yeah.
of dying like that, but it's strangely also disaffected. Like
Yeah.
you don't feel like you would when one of your protagonists dies,
You're
and
right.
a young one, no less. Like there's a certain amount of like, I guess this is part of the story, or I guess this is how it goes
Yeah.
for them. Like you don't have that same attachment. There is a certain amount of detachment.
Yeah.
And that's odd how Ang Lee does that and why
Yeah.
he's trying to do it,
And to come back to the final character in this, ballet of all these things happening at night, is we actually see Janie come home. from her tryst with the boy, she's the one who went home with the 20-something boy. And this is the final like presentation of the crack in her armor. She comes home to her like, house that's very empty or cold. It's more cold. She thinks her kids are in their bedroom, and she glances at the room and decides not to check on them. And she goes into her waterbed and curls up into a ball. And you get a sense like, oh, she had her performance of like, I picked the boy, I get the young one, I'm going to have the best experience. And she's very dissatisfied in this moment. You get a sense, right? It's not a satisfying experience that, we have been presented that Janie is so confident in having. But it also leads to, she goes to bed alone because Jim and Elena have made their way back home, but get stuck because they're trying to drive home and their car goes off the road. And so they're kind of spend half the night in the car waiting for it to dry out enough so they can drive the rest of the way home. And then meanwhile, like Kevin Kline is sobering up throughout like the night back at Dot's house. And so they all are culminating, coming back together. And, again, it's supposed to be the most affecting part of the death of Mikey is, in a weird way, it's like there's this, and it's not even this to me. And it's the very, very last scene. There's two things that are most affecting to me. And I want to hear your thoughts about this too. It's like, so Kevin Kline's character, Ben, driving home, finds Mikey and he picks him up and he brings him to the Carver household. And then he gives him to Jim, the dad, and he's very emotional about it. But the most affecting things, and it's and also it's all crazy. So there's so many things happening. And Elena discovers Wendy with Sandy in the bedroom and just says, come, and just says nothing. But it's the moment where we see Janie, because she's lucky enough to be just waking up and she doesn't know yet. And to me, that's when the only time it actually hit me. It's like, here's this woman who's lucky enough to be waking up and she doesn't know yet that her son is dead.
Yeah, and the future of that marriage, which is already dead, is kind of like, this is over. I mean, I don't know how one survives it. And and she wakes up to the moaning of her husband over the body of her son, and Sandy is looking on, the brother, like, what's going on, completely confused. And Christina Ricci's character Wendy gives him a kiss, and then that family leaves to go pick up their son. And that's the other last moment, right? Is when you have, Paul coming off the train, which got stuck during the ice storm all night. And so he was stuck on the train all night. He comes first thing in the morning, and then they see him, and there's that kind of moment of reconnection. And then as they're driving home,
or before, they're still in the parking lot.
They're not. Yeah, he breaks down and he starts crying hysterically. And the wife kind of reaches over and kind of reassures him, and the kids are in the back like, what's going on, right? Like, we're watching our parents break down as if it were us, right?
Yeah, and it's really, it literally ends on the Paul character, because he's the only one who doesn't know, right? And he's finally loses his smirk, and this is something Ang Lee talked about. It's like, there's nothing more devastating than witnessing your parents break down. Like, it's you're not prepared to handle your parent to be that emotional. And so, you're not exactly sure. Like, the Hoods have been presented as a family that might make it, right? You get a sense the Carvers are fucked for all sorts of reasons. Like, they were screwed before the death of Mikey, but that's like obviously the nail in the coffin of that family. And poor Sandy, like, what is he going to be left with? And so, but the Hoods, you're saying like, oh, maybe there's some reconciliation. And there was this interesting kind of question that reoccurred in the Cannes or New York Film Festival interviews with Sigourney Weaver and Kevin Kline. Same interviewer asked both of them at separate moments, separate interviews, where's your character now? Because it's a 1997 release. It's a 1973 movie, so it's almost 25 years later. And they asked them both, like, where's your character now? And you know, because the book is like, well, they're definitely divorced, and they're both like struggling with it. Like Janie's like, well, I don't think I'm in affairs, but I definitely think I'm definitely divorced, but I hope I'm satisfied in some sense of who I'm trying to become. And the Kevin Kline character is like, well, they tell me I'm divorced, but I'm not. Like Kevin Kline's trying to be hopeful, you know. He's like, I don't believe that. I think I had it. I had enough of and he doesn't just say it glibly. He tries to wrap it in.
I
He
kind of
thinks,
see that too. I
yeah,
read it
like,
a little bit like that.
and it's interesting because the writer of the book that it's based on, Rick Moody, who was part of this awful Charlie Rose interview, but at least I got to hear his thoughts for a moment, is he talked about Ang Lee's portrait of these characters is being more sympathetic than his portrait of the same characters in his book, which he found really interesting. It's like that detachment that was allowed by Ang Lee as not being like the one who literally experienced it, because Rick Moody, the film is the book is semi-autobiographical. And he said he enjoyed his sympathy for them. And so maybe that's where Kevin Kline got this sense of hope. It's like, it's through Ang Lee's sympathy for these. He's like, he would say these great things. It's like, Kevin Kline's talking about like, how am I supposed to approach this key party thing? Like, this is a fucking weird situation. And he's like, you're just someone who's trying to, you're just doing something different. You're not bad. You're not good. It's like, you're trying to understand what it means to experience difference, And
I think, that's one of the things the film does too. Like, none of its characters, Sigourney Weaver might be the one who would say, because she's cold. But like you said, there are real moments where you see through that. And it's not just there's this one character. They're all trying to negotiate this stuff in their own way. But one of the things that Ang Lee said in the New York Times article that you linked to that I really liked was he talks about, on one hand, family is about security, warmth, and you cuddle together. And on the other hand, family is about restraint. When the social impulse is to be liberated, where does family go? And there is something I really liked about that, because as Tobey Maguire starts the film on the train, so the film kind of starts oddly.
it's bookended. It starts at the end.
It starts at the end where he's getting off the train to actually see his family. But after that, you have the whole action, and then you have him coming off that train. Mm-hmm. He gets off the train and comes. He's reading the Fantastic Four. And what he's reading is this kind of moment where, what's his name? The doctor.
Reed.
Yeah. So Reed is actually basically going to atomize his son. Yeah. And that's the only thing he can do to save him, according to Reed. And this leads, Paul to say, family is the void you emerge from and the void you return to. And I found that really powerful, because at my stage in life, I have kids now who are a little bit older or about the same age as the kids in this film, who are starting to leave, like Paul has left for school. And like, I am seeing that, through their very existence outside of the world of our family and our house, they have to, in some ways, by nature, kind of remove themselves a little bit from that and kind of push us away. And it's normal. And I did it. And it's not a question of that. But being on the other side of it now as a parent, and then watching those changes as your kids change and kind of move out, and they kind of, to be liberated, have to kind of, in some ways, not completely, but to some degree, right, kind of push back against or marginalize or downplay the notion of the family that you had kind of invested in for so many years and been part of. There's a certain amount of loss in that. And there's a certain amount of, like, for me, it's difficult, to watch my oldest, who's now in Milan, who's living his best life, who's loving life, maybe too much. And like, He doesn't want to come home. He doesn't want it. And I love that. Like, I was the same way. I went to Los Angeles as far as I could get away from my family, and that there's some beauty in that. But like this idea of family as the void you both emerge from and return to, right? That book ending of that sense of family and of that thing that, you know, he leaves and starts and leaves to come back to. There's a real beautiful poetry to the idea of family is inescapable, and yet it has been kind of defined as something we must kind of erase or remove to identify our sense of liberty and identity. And there's that great paradox at the center of it, which is the paradox, you know, Paul talks about with Reed and what he's doing to his son. That's so beautifully done in this movie. That one little clip from a Fantastic Four comic, in many ways for me, is like the coda, the key to the whole movie and to how I feel right now about my own children as they leave. I was really like, wow, that's what struck me. You know, there's all the things happening in the movie and all these things, but what struck me is these parents trying to negotiate these kids growing up and getting ready to leave.
Yeah, and not having to zap them with lasers, you know, so they don't destroy the universe.
My
you know?
atomizer isn't working.
Nah, it's not. Well, that's good because you don't want your kids to turn into the Incredible Hulk either. So, well, that's a great one to end on. So, you know, thanks everyone. This is I think a pretty great movie to spend some time thinking about. I hope you enjoyed it too.
Yeah, it's a great one. Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.